For most of my parenting life, I thought I understood the Amish advantage. I thought it was the absence of things. No phones, no social media, no constant comparison with curated lives, no dopamine loops engineered by people in California with PhDs in behavioral psychology. I thought that if you removed those things, you'd get what Amish teenagers seem to have, which is, by any honest measure, a level of psychological stability that looks almost implausible from the outside. So about 4 years ago, when I had the chance to spend time with several families in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, I went in thinking I was going to confirm what I already believed, that the secret was subtraction. Remove the noise, get the peace. I was wrong in a way that took me a long time to fully understand. I remember standing in the yard of a family I'll call the Zooks. That's not their name, but it's close enough. Watching their 16-year-old son, Daniel, come in from the barn on a Wednesday afternoon. He'd been up since 5. He'd helped with the morning milking, gone to school, come home, and was now heading back out to finish something with the fence line before the light went off. He moved with a particular quality that I kept trying to name and couldn't quite get to. It wasn't happiness exactly. It wasn't the cheerfulness you see in teenagers who are doing well by external measures. It was something more like settledness, like a person who knows where they are in the world. His mother, watching him from the doorway, said something I didn't fully process until weeks later. She said, "He knows what he's for." I went home and I kept turning that sentence over. Because the American mental health data for teenagers is not subtle. The CDC's 2023 Youth Risk Behavior Survey found that 42% of US high school students reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, up from 28% in 2011. That is not a small shift. That is a generation-scale change in a 12-year window. Suicide is now the second leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 10 and 34. The American Psychological Association's 2022 Stress in America report found that teenagers report higher chronic stress levels than any other age group, including adults in full-time employment. And Daniel Zook was fixing a fence at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday and moving like someone who had found, at 16, what most adults spend decades searching for. The easy answer is no screens. The easy answer is always no screens. But there are plenty of American teenagers who have dramatically reduced screen time and are still anxious, still depressed, still unmoored. And when researchers look closely at Amish communities, including a study published in 2010 in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease by researchers Hauenstein, Petterson, and Merwin, which remains one of the few systematic assessments of mental health in Old Order Amish populations, what they find is not simply the absence of technology. They find something structural, something that was built in, deliberately, for generations. The screens are not the story. The screens were never the story. Here is what the story actually is. There is a word in Amish culture that you have to understand before any of the practical details make sense. Gelassenheit. It is usually translated as yielding or submission, but those translations lose almost everything important about it. A better translation for our purposes is this: the settled understanding that you are part of something larger than yourself, and that your life derives meaning from your contribution to that larger thing, not from your individual achievement, not from how you are perceived, not from the optimization of your personal experience. Gelassenheit is not a feeling Amish teenagers are told to have. It is the water they swim in from infancy. It is embedded in the structure of every day, the design of every role, the architecture of every relationship in an Amish household and community. I want to be honest about something before we go further. This channel does not romanticize traditional cultures, and I'm not going to start now. Amish communities have real tensions and real struggles, including ones that are rarely discussed in outside coverage. The purpose of what follows is not to hold up Amish life as perfect. It is to name the specific structural features of how Amish teenagers are raised that produce measurable psychological stability, and to ask what it would look like to reconstruct those features, in translation, in a modern household. Because here is the thing about Gelassenheit, developmentally speaking. What it actually creates, underneath the theology, is something that developmental psychologists have been studying for decades under a completely different name. Dr. Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, who is about as far from an Amish farmstead as a human being can get, spent years identifying the factors that protect people from depression and anxiety. His research, consolidated in his work on positive psychology, and later in the framework he called PERMA, found that purpose and meaning were among the most powerful protective factors against psychological illness that exist. Not the absence of hardship, not the presence of comfort. Purpose, meaning, the sense that your life is connected to something that matters. Amish teenagers have this in structural form, baked into the calendar, into the physical layout of the farm, into the expectations of the community. It is not motivational, it is architectural. Here is how it is built. Step 1. Real work with real consequences, starting young. The first thing that struck me about Daniel was not his settledness. It was that the fence he was fixing mattered. Not symbolically, literally. If the fence was not fixed before Thursday, the livestock situation would become a genuine problem for the family. He was not doing a chore designed to teach him responsibility as a developmental goal. He was doing a task that was genuinely necessary, and the family's daily functioning was genuinely dependent on it being done. This is the piece that most modern parenting gets subtly, consequentially wrong. What we typically call chores in a modern Western household are tasks that are assigned to children for the purpose of teaching responsibility. The implicit contract is, I have created this task as a teaching opportunity for you. The adult could do it faster, better, and without the associated management overhead, but we've decided it's good for you to do it. Children know this, not consciously perhaps, but their nervous systems register it. The task is not real in the way that matters. Nothing changes if they don't do it, except the relationship with the parent. The consequence is social, not functional. In an Amish household, the work is real. Anthropologist Karen Johnson Weiner, who has studied Old Order Amish communities extensively and documented their practices in her book, New York Amish, Life in the Plain Communities of the Empire State, notes that Amish children typically take on genuinely functional roles in the household and farm economy by age 6 or 7. Not simulated roles, not roles that exist to teach a lesson, but roles that the household actually depends on. By 12 or 13, many Amish teenagers are managing significant portions of the farm's daily operation without adult supervision. The developmental mechanism here is well documented. Researchers Albert Bandura and Dale Shunk, in research published in the Journal of Educational Psychology, identified what Bandura called self-efficacy, a person's felt sense of their own capability to produce outcomes through their actions. Bandura's research found that self-efficacy is built through one specific experience above all others: genuine mastery. Not praise for effort, not participation trophies, not told that you did a great job. Actually doing something hard that actually mattered, and seeing the real outcome of having done it. An Amish teenager who has been running a meaningful portion of the farm since age 12 has accumulated thousands of hours of genuine mastery experience by 16. Not mastery in a structured, scaffolded, consequence-reduced environment. Real mastery, where real things depended on them getting it right. The most common mistake, when parents try to import this, is creating tasks that look functional but aren't. Paying a child to do something the parent would have paid a professional to do anyway is closer than most chores. But the clearest version of this is finding one domain, one area of the household, where your 9-year-old or 12-year-old is genuinely responsible, and where the household will genuinely feel the absence of that responsibility if it doesn't happen. It doesn't have to be farming. It can be something that fits your actual life, but it has to be real. Step 2. A community that needs them specifically. Here is something that does not get discussed in the conversation about Amish teenagers and mental health, and I think it is at least as important as the work. When Daniel Zook fixes the fence, he is not just contributing to his household. He is visible in that contribution to people beyond his household. The family who farms the adjacent land knows Daniel. The church community knows Daniel. When the Zook family shows up on Sunday, there is a set of people for whom Daniel is a known person with a known role and a known value. He is not anonymous. He is not performing for an audience of strangers on a platform that will never know his name. He is known, specifically, by people who depend on his family and whose families his family depends on. This is what developmental psychologists call community embeddedness, and it is one of the most consistently underrated factors in adolescent mental health. Dr. Jean Twenge at San Diego State University has spent years tracking the relationship between social connection patterns and adolescent depression. Her analysis, published in journals including Clinical Psychological Science, consistently finds that the quality and nature of social connection matters far more than the quantity. Specifically, connections characterized by mutual dependence, genuine role, and reciprocal responsibility are protective in ways that connection characterized by social performance and audience accumulation is not. What social media offers teenagers is an enormous audience and almost no genuine dependence. The people watching you on a screen do not need you. You have not contributed anything functional to their lives. Their lives would be essentially unchanged if you did not post. That is a painful form of invisibility, dressed up as visibility. An Amish teenager at 16 operates inside a web of genuine mutual dependence. They are needed, specifically, not as a consumer, not as an audience member, not as a content producer, but as a person whose specific capabilities fill a specific gap in a community that would actually feel that gap if they disappeared. The Amish practice that produces this is not one thing. It is the cumulative effect of a community structure organized around real interdependence. Barn raisings where the community's collective capacity genuinely matters, shared harvest periods, church-based mutual aid that is functional rather than ceremonial. But the translatable piece, the thing that can be rebuilt in a modern household without moving to Lancaster County, is the deliberate creation of genuine dependence within the family and the immediate community. What that looks like practically. A 13-year-old who is the person in the household who manages a genuinely necessary function, not a token one, and whose absence would be genuinely felt. A family that is part of a community small enough that the 13-year-old is a known person with a known role, not a background presence. A neighborhood relationship structure, or a faith community structure, or an extracurricular community structure, where the teenager's contribution is functional rather than performative. The size of the audience is not the protection. The realness of the need is. Step 3. The absence of optionality about identity. This one is going to sound wrong before it sounds right, so stay with me. One of the most consistent findings in adolescent psychology research is that the experience of too many choices about identity, who am I, what do I value, what kind of person am I becoming, is not liberating for teenagers. It is destabilizing. Psychologist Barry Schwartz, in research later expanded into his book The Paradox of Choice, found that beyond a certain threshold, more options produce not more satisfaction, but more anxiety, more self-doubt, and lower overall well-being. For teenagers specifically, developmental psychologist Erik Erikson identified the adolescent task as identity versus role confusion, the developmental challenge of consolidating a coherent sense of self out of the competing possibilities of who one might become. Erikson's framework predicted, and subsequent research confirmed, that the adolescent who faces too many simultaneous identity options without a stable container for evaluating them does not experience that multiplicity as freedom. They experience it as vertigo. An Amish teenager does not face identity vertigo. This is not because they have no sense of self. It is because the community provides what Erikson called an identity container. A clear role, a clear set of values, a clear sense of what kind of person one is expected to become, and what that person is expected to contribute. The teenager's energy is not spent on the question of who to be. It is spent on the question of how to become, more fully, the person their community has already recognized them as becoming. Rumspringa, the Amish practice of allowing teenagers a period of exposure to the outside world before choosing baptism, is often cited as evidence that Amish teenagers are constrained and then briefly freed. What it actually represents developmentally is something more interesting. It is a community that is confident enough in the identity container it has built that it can offer the comparison without fear. The rate at which Amish teenagers who go through Rumspringa choose to return and join the church, which Amish scholar Donald Craybill at Elizabethtown College puts at over 80%, is not evidence of coercion. It is evidence of a community that has successfully built something worth returning to. The modern parenting equivalent of this is not about reducing options. It is about providing a stable values container inside which the teenager can encounter options without dissolving. A family with a clear, consistent, practiced set of values and a clear understanding of what this family is for, not imposed as rules, but lived as daily reality, gives a teenager the neurological equivalent of a fixed point. They can push against it, leave it temporarily, explore from it, but they know where the center is. Most modern households have preferences. Preferences are not the same as a center. The pattern that connects all three. I went to Lancaster County expecting to learn something about screens. I came home having learned something about architecture. The screens are a symptom. What produced the symptom was the dismantling, over about 50 years, of 3 structural features of adolescent life that kept teenage depression rare: genuine consequential work, genuine community embeddedness, and a stable identity container within which to develop. When those 3 things were present, and they were present in different forms across almost every traditional culture that has low rates of adolescent depression, teenagers knew what they were for. They were not optimizing their personal brand. They were not accumulating followers. They were not performing an identity for an audience that didn't need them. They were contributing to something real, within a community that knew them specifically, inside a container of values that gave them a fixed point. Removing the screens without rebuilding those 3 structures is like removing smoke detectors from a burning building. The alarm stops, the fire continues. Daniel Zook will turn 17 this winter. He is not happy all the time. Nobody is. He has hard days, and the community he lives in has real tensions and real difficulties. But when I asked his mother whether she worried about him, in the way that I sometimes described worrying about my own kids, this ambient, background anxiety about whether they were okay, whether they were developing right, whether something invisible was wrong, she looked at me with genuine puzzlement. She said, "He knows what he's for." That sentence is the whole thing. If you could give your teenager one thing, not a rule, not a phone policy, not a structured enrichment program, but one structural feature of their daily life, it would be that. A real answer to that question. Not a career aspiration, not a personality trait, a function inside a community within a set of values, where the answer to the question, "What am I for?" is specific and real, and confirmed by people who genuinely depend on the answer. You don't need a farm to build that. You need to know what your family is for, and then you need to let your teenager be genuinely necessary to it. Start there, not with the phone. Start there. If this landed somewhere real for you, leave a comment with the age of your teenager and one domain where they could be genuinely necessary rather than theoretically responsible. I read every one of them. And if you want to go deeper into how traditional cultures raise teenagers who are psychologically grounded, subscribe. There is a lot more of this coming.